Good morning, students. Today we shall talk about A Doll's House. A Doll's House, written by Norwegian dramatist Henrik Ibsen. Henrik Ibsen is known for problem play. Problem or problem plays are associated with either social problem, political problem, economic problem, or any sort of problems which has a sort of message. So the present play, A Doll's House, is a problem play. It is a play in 3 acts. It was written in 1879 at a time when women were completely subservient to their husbands. No matter how much a husband might love his wife, she was regarded by him in those days as his property. So they couldn't develop their individuality, and she was regarded by him in those days as his property. In other words, a husband looked upon his wife as his possession. Customs and conventions demanded that she should be guided completely by her husband and should in all respects adjust herself to his ideas, views, opinions and tastes. This meant that a woman had no opportunity to develop her own mind and her own individuality. A Doll's House tells the story of a woman called Nora, who, after having lived as a conventional kind of wife to her husband for 8 years or so, ultimately decided to liberate herself from the restraints under which she had been living contentedly and without complaint. In order to liberate herself, this woman took the extreme step of leaving her home, her husband, and even her 3 children. She went into the world outside to get a first-hand experience of life and to discover her own personalities. Torvald Helmer, his wife Nora, and their 3 children are living in a comfortable apartment in a big town where Helmer has been a lawyer of modest means, so that Nora has always found it necessary to exercise the utmost economy in the household expenditure. The play begins on a Christmas Eve and ends about 3 days later. 8 years ago, Helmer had fallen critically ill, and the doctor had advised Nora to take him to warm climate in southern Europe. Nora didn't have enough money for such a trip, and yet it was necessary for her to take her husband to a warm country if his life was to be saved. Without telling her husband anything about the step she was going to take in order to obtain money for the purpose, she entered into a transaction with a man called Krogstad. She borrowed $1,200, the equivalent of about 250 pounds in those days, on interest from him, and executed a bond. It had been necessary for her to have the bond signed by someone who would stand surety for the repayment of the loan. As there was no other surety available, she felt compelled to forge her own father's signature on the bond without realizing in the least that forging a signature was a criminal act which could put her in great trouble if the forgery were reported to the police or to a court of law. It so happened that Krogstad, the creditor, detected the forgery, but he kept silent about it because Nora had been paying regular monthly installments to him against the loan she had taken. With the money she had borrowed, she had taken for her husband for the treatment. She took her husband to Italy, where after a year-long stay, he had completely recovered his health. Till the end, Nora never told him either about the loan or about the forgery, the implications of which she herself did not know. She did not tell Helmer about the loan because it would have hurt his self-respect to know that his wife had borrowed money for his sake. He might have appreciated the step she took in borrowing the money. And in any case, he would never have tolerated her act of forgery if he had come to know it. Now, on the Christmas Eve, 8 years after Helmer's critical illness, Mrs. Linne, a friend of Nora's school days, but now a widow, comes to see Nora because she needs a job. She needs a job and she thinks that Nora might be able to help her. Nora introduces her to her husband, who promises to give Mrs. Linne a job in the bank, of which he has only recently been appointed the manager and of which he is going to take charge in few days' time. It so happens that Nora's creditor, Krogstad, is already working in a subordinate position in the same bank. Helmer and Krogstad had been great friends during their boyhood, but now Helmer holds Krogstad in contempt. In the first place, Krogstad had spoilt his reputation by an act of dishonesty for which he could have been prosecuted if the matter had gone to the court. This act of dishonesty on Krogstad's part was an act of forgery, similar to that of Nora. But while Nora had forged a signature without realizing that it was something illegal and punishable with imprisonment, Krogstad had committed an act of forgery, knowing fully well what he was doing. On Krogstad's part, it had been deliberately fraudulent act. However, he had been fortunate enough to escape punishment for his criminal act. Helmer had been fortunate enough to escape punishment for his criminal act. Helmer had come to know of Krogstad's act of dishonesty and had therefore formed a low opinion about his friend of old days. For this reason, Helmer had decided to dismiss Krogstad from his post in the bank, and now when Nora recommends Mrs. Linne for a job, Helmer makes up his mind to appoint Mrs. Linne to the post which would be vacated by Krogstad But Elmer has a second reason also: get rid of Krogstad. Krogstad always speaks to Helmer in a familiar manner, addressing him by his Christian name and behaving as if the friendship of their days of boyhood still exists between them. Helmer does not want that a man in a subordinate position, and especially a man who had been guilty of a criminal act, should behave as if were Helmer's equal. Of course, as has already been pointed out above, Helmer is totally unaware of two very important facts which are relevant to the present situation. He does not know what his wife had borrowed money from Krogstad, and he does not know that his wife had forged a signature of the bond which she had executed at the time. She had borrowed money from Krogstad in order to take her husband to Italy to save his life from the dangerous illness from which he was suffering at the time. Here we see that dominating role of husband over the wife, and we see it was the male dominated tendency to exploit the wife, to torture the wife. Helmer is the representative of that class who exploits women, who dominates over the women, and proves that women don't have their own identity or individuality in 19th century, and Nora is the role model for such a woman. She is a lesson, she is an ideal for such women. And this drama is about the relationship between husband and wife, especially relationship in middle class families. Elmer's rejection of Nora's recommendation on Krogstad's behalf. Krogstad's incriminating letter. We come to know about Krogstad's incriminating letter. We come to know about Mrs. Linde. We come to know about shock of Nora, that Helmer didn't care for Nora's feelings. And as Arundhati Roy says that women have feeling and we must respect the feelings of women. And Nora is a completely disillusioned with her husband. Nora is exit from her husband's home. Although the crisis which had been brought about by Krogstad's threats and blackmail is now over, another crisis develops. Nora is now a changed woman. A light has dawned upon her mind. She tells her husband that she is no longer prepared to continue to be his doll wife. She says that her father had always treated her as a baby doll, and that her husband has always treated her as a doll wife. She tells Helmer that she has decided to leave this doll's house in which she has been living. She has now realized that she is an individual in her own right. She is no longer prepared to submit blindly to the conventions of society or to the laws of society or even to the dictates of the morality and religion. She has found that she has a mind of her own. With this mind, she would go into the world to find out by first-hand experience what is right and what is wrong. Her most sacred duty, she says, is not to her husband or to her children, but to herself. She thinks it imperative that she should discover the truths of life. She would like to shift what is true from what is false. She demands from Helmer the wedding ring which she had given to him at the time of their marriage ceremony, and she gets it back. She returns his wedding ring to him and tells him that she is now leaving him, her home, and even her children to begin a new life. After saying all this and paying no heed to Helmer's entreaties not to leave, she walks out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Thus, we see that Nora is an ideal woman for the women of the rest of the world. There are many women, they suffer like Nora, and they need to learn a lesson. They must learn a lesson. Okay, thank you. Complete. Good luck, best wishes.